In sales, it often seems like everyone has his or her own approach to selling. Today's guest is no stranger to this phenomena, but has spent years working to contain the various approaches to a couple dozen common themes. Let's have ourselves a pocket-sized pep talk, meet this man, and focus on some of the most common pieces he's been able to identify.
A pocket-sized pep talk, the podcast that can help energize your business and your life with a quick, inspiring message. Now, here's your host, Rob Jolles.
Today's guest, Fred Diamond, is the host and producer of the Sales Game Changers podcast and is the co-founder of the Institute for Excellence in Sales, IES. His book, Insights for Sales Game Changers, will hit the bookshelves this spring. Welcome to the show, Fred.
Rob, it's great to see you. Thank you so much.
It's good to see you again, too. And so let's get to work. I got a lot of questions set up for you. I know that let's start with the Institute for Excellence in Sales, just because that's how we met. Tell people a little bit about that group.
Yeah, so the Institute for Excellence in Sales is a global organization for sales leaders, typically B2B. Our mission is to help them attract, retain, motivate, and elevate top-tier sales talent. One of the things that we do is we've historically brought sales thought leaders such as you to our stage, our live stage or virtual stage or our mastermind stage to work with sales leaders at companies like Salesforce, Amazon, Red Hat Software, Google, Apple. So it's been great. We have members all over the world. We have a robust women in sales program, and it's really about helping sales professionals take their careers and their lives to the next level.
Yeah. And I have been a part of that. I've spoken a few times there. It's a tremendous group. And I actually remember when I think we met at Legal Seafood. We had lunch and we sort of talked about it. And you know, at that point it was on paper. And how many years ago was that?
That was a long time ago. I remember you had the halibut and I had the salmon, and it was interesting because we had just come up with the idea. I was a marketing consultant, and now they call it fractional CMO, Chief Marketing Officer. But basically, I was an outsourced VP of sales. Most of my clients were sales VPs who were struggling. So I needed to figure out a way to be in the room with more sales VPs. So we came up with the idea of the Institute for Excellence in Sales, and we basically did two things in the beginning. It was about 10 years ago. We did a big award event. I think you were the keynote speaker at our second award event, probably 2012, I guess. You did a great job. And then every month we brought people like you to our stage, Neil Rackham and Ian Altman and Stephen Gaffney, just great speakers. And then I refer to you, as you may recall, as the Alec Baldwin of the IES. You've been on our stage at least a half a dozen times. You have that jacket that we give out. So yeah, that's what we've been doing.
Well, it's a tremendous group, and I've always enjoyed being affiliated with it.
Thank you.
All right, so let's push on 500 episodes of the Sales Game Changers podcast. I'm very jealous of that, by the way, because I've been working really hard over the last 2 years, and I'm up to 140 episodes. And I saw, as I was working through your materials, I went, 500, this guy's killing me. How long did it take you to get to 500?
Just as a quick note, you're killing me in the book publishing. You're up to what, at least 10, I guess. I've read everything that you've written, the Road Warrior books and, how to really nail it on sales events and business events. So I'm striving to get to where you are as an author. I started the Sales Game Changers podcast because in 2017, I decided to stop being a consultant and to grow the Institute for Excellence in Sales into a global organization. Here's the thing. Most of my career, Rob, was in marketing at companies like Apple and Compaq, and I had Microsoft as a client when I was consulting. Marketing is a completely different function than sales. So I was a great marketer, but my pipeline was like negative. So I said to myself, okay, if I'm going to run this organization, I need more transactions. So I need to meet more sales VPs. So I came up with the idea of the podcast. And in the beginning, prior to the pandemic, all I was doing was interviewing sales VPs. And I would go to their office. I had a couple mics and a couple ATR 2100s, a Zoom 5 recorder. I had some really cool filters. I gave it a lot of thought. I took a course, and basically, I would show up at these people's offices and they were very impressed. most of the sales VPs that I was talking to had never been on a podcast talking about sales. Now, these were all great presenters on products and industry and those things, but almost invariably they've never spoken about themselves. And I was fascinated, like you, I was fascinated by their stories and their mentor examples and their lessons and their greatest sales success. And I really, really enjoyed talking to them. And it got noticed around, people started introducing me to their peers. The next thing I know, we're up to a couple hundred, and I tripled the size of the business because these were my customers, Rob, that I was interviewing. And eventually when the pandemic kicked in, which we'll talk about, I started interviewing people like you, authors, thought leaders, speakers, because we were doing a show every day. It was so much fun and people were just asking us for more and more content. But in the beginning, I was interviewing my prospects. When people ask me about podcasting, I say, you know what? Interview people that you want to know, that you want to do business with, that you're interested in talking to.
Yeah. And I want to get to that too, because, there's many reasons to launch a podcast and you've identified a couple of them. So we'll talk about that. I just know that in my lowly 140, of which many of them are just, I'm talking to me, by the way. So I've probably got about 70 or 80 interviews under my belt. I've learned a ton interviewing these people, and I'm always thinking, now, you're the host chair, Rob, you'll run the show here. And I'm sort of sitting back and going, wow, just fascinated by some of these stories. Talk to me about, and I know it's hard and you don't have to use I was on your podcast once, so we already know that mine was fascinating. So other than Rob Jollis, give me some moments that inspired you.
There's been so many, and I get excited about every single interview, right? So I'm excited because first of all, this is a possible prospect for me, for the business, but also, it's a unique opportunity for them to tell their story. I'll give a couple examples. Prior to the pandemic, I was literally going to people's offices. So whenever I would travel, I had my mics and I had my recorder. My daughter had a dance competition in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. I don't know if you've ever been on a stage in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, but it's famous for one thing, Dollywood, right? So I reached out to Dollywood's VP of sales. Her name is Cordelia Marzak. I said, I'm going to be in Pigeon Forge. My daughter has a dance competition. This is what I do. I'd love to interview you for the podcast. She had never heard of me, of course. And, she did a little research, brought her PR person in. We did the interview Sunday morning at 8:00 in the conference room next to Dolly's office. And it was great. She talked about Dolly Parton, and Dolly Parton, by the way, was just inducted announced that she's going to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and right. All the great stuff that Dolly's done. Cordelia told these just amazing stories of what a fascinating business person Dolly was, way that Dolly treated her employees, which was just mind-blowingly positive. And just being in the room next to Dolly's office was just a great experience for me. And I love that. But I'll give you another example. I've interviewed people that I know, that I've known as sales leaders over the years. And there are moments that have really stuck with me. One of them was a sales leader named Ivy Savoy Smith. And she's the VP of sales. Now it's called, it used to be called Entercom. It was the radio stations in DC, and Entercom is all over the globe. She was the GM for DC, African-American woman. And we talked about some of her challenges as a woman in sales and selling her stations that cater to urban markets, and how some companies and restaurant chains and events weren't quite ready to advertise to an urban audience. This is probably early 2000s, late 1990s, even just like 20 years ago. And as she's telling me the story of how she convinced some of her clients to advertise on her urban stations, we were both crying. I mean, it was such an emotional story. And this was live. This was a live interview I did at her office in downtown DC. And it was just, to understand how to get a customer to shift their positioning, especially to a marketplace that was so critical. That was a great story that stuck with me.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you mentioned the getting emotional. I have found myself only a couple of times, but really being surprised by going, what's going on here? Just climbing so deep into some of the stories that we pull out that it is emotional for the guest and the host. So I know what you mean. It kind of comes from nowhere. I've been able to maintain my professionalism. However, I did find myself sort of looking off camera a little bit just to gather myself. These stories are powerful.
Well, you know, one of the questions I used to ask was, tell us about a mentor, right? So the people I'm interviewing, Rob, are VPs of sales at companies like Amazon and Salesforce, people who have achieved, you know, good things in the world that we deal in, the B2B sales world. And when I would ask the mentor question, sometimes it would bring up their father, sometimes they would bring up their first boss, you know, and everybody has people in their careers, Rob, who have shifted their direction, right? And you and I could probably name 3 or 4 people right now who we feel that way. And I actually interviewed a guy who was my boss at one point, and now he was always a VP of sales, but he was a VP of sales for a storage company. And as I was interviewing him, and he was telling me about someone who he viewed as a mentor, this guy was my mentor, right? And as I'm asking him the question, he's telling me the story, which I had heard before. I remember I was getting, like, talk about getting choked up. I was saying to myself, here's my mentor talking about his mentor. And here I am. He gave me 30 minutes of his time to interview him to tell his story.
Yeah. Wow. That's incredible. You know, and back to Dolly real fast, and then I'll move off. I never met Dolly Parton, but I worked for a group that she came in and was a speaker at the group. And I met with maybe 4 or 5 people, just logistics and AV and just kind of the people that were running the meeting. I was speaking at the meeting, but on another day, so I never met her. And I do remember that there wasn't one person who didn't say that working with her personally was one of the greatest joys of their life, that she is as nice as she looks. She's now, you've told me, I didn't know, you know, it surprised me. She, you know, how devoted and loyal that team is to her, and how much respect they have. I'm speaking from more of a vendor standpoint of her just coming out and doing a job, speaking, and just people being blown away with how down to earth she was and just how kind. And it did have an effect on me of thinking, not that I'm at Dolly's level exactly, but just never get too full of yourself. If Dolly Parton can be that humble, I think, you know, a lowly sales trainer with a couple books under his arm can remind himself to be humble as well. So I did take that with me, but that was that's as close as I ever got to Dolly.
Well, one of the great stories that Cordelia told us was, and I was a little twist on the interview. Dolly had come to Dollywood, and that when she comes, there's a process. Right. You know, the halls have to be cleared, and right. You know, her schedule, as you can imagine, it's down to the minute. They're walking down the hallway, and Dolly looked into one of the ballrooms where they were getting ready for serving lunch with her and some of the customers. And there were 2 women there who have obviously worked for Dollywood for decades, I guess. And they were just going about doing their job, setting up the tables. Dolly made like a quick turn into that ballroom. They were startled that Dolly appeared, and Dolly went up to both of them, knew their names, right? And, you know, just asked personal questions. And Cordelia says, the other little twist, that was my favorite interview of the over 500 I've done, besides, of course, the one I did with you. And it was our least listened to show. And the reason was, most of the VPs, I mean, we do a lot of promotion via LinkedIn, obviously, and we post on Apple Podcast, and you know, we post on Spotify and all the usual places where podcasts are. But a big way that we communicate is LinkedIn. Cordelia had a very small LinkedIn following. So the show got our baseline, maybe a dozen more than the typical downloads that we would typically get. Whereas other shows with people who have large LinkedIn followings or downlines of people working for them have gotten 10 times, you know, the standard download that we would get. And it just kind of taught me a lesson about, you know, how you need to be out there if you're looking to promote your business, not just you.
Right. That's an excellent point. All right. So let's shift. Let's talk about the book a little bit. You focused in this book that's coming out. When is it coming out? This summer?
No, it'll be out this spring. It'll be out sometime in June of 2022. Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah. So, wow. Well, you're about a month away. Beware, by the way. I tell my author, this is your first book, Fred?
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. That I'm probably one of the most positive guys that you've met. I'm a pretty positive guy. And it took me by surprise that the only times where I struggle a little bit is when the day a book comes out, because you have got yourself emotionally ready and charged to hit this day, this time in June. It's coming. We've been working all this. And then the next day comes. It's like, well, now what are we doing? And of course, we market and we push, but there's that ramp up. So beware, Fred. You might feel a little bit empty the day of and after. But you're a marketing guru. I know you know what to do.
I'm actually feeling that right now. I've actually written 2 books, Rob, in the last 6 months. I'm trying to catch up to you. Both of them are literally at the publisher, and I miss writing the books. So I understand what you're saying. I can't wait to. It's taken me nearly 6 decades to write my first book. I've written tons of blogs and obviously over 500 podcasts, but having a book is a different feeling, and I'm just really excited. So I appreciate that bit of advice.
Yeah. You've run a lot of 10Ks. Now you ran a marathon. You got a marathon under your belt. All right. So let's talk about this book a little bit. 14 most common themes from your 500 shows. Give us, I know we can't go over all 14, but give us a couple of them that really stand out.
Yeah. So just to get to the book real quick, we transcribed every episode we've ever done of the podcast from day one. I have this amazing transcriber. She actually lives in Spain. She was living in Venezuela when I first met her. She's brilliant, speaks better English than you or I. And she transcribed every show. And, I love when people listen to the podcast, but if they're going to read the transcript, or if they're just going to look at my LinkedIn post, I'm happy. It's some degree of touch. Although, as you and I both know, we want people to listen because there's the emotion and things like that. So we started transcribing every show. And I was thinking about what could I do differently? Now, unlike you, you're a thought leader. You bring new ideas, fresh ideas. What I do is I get information from people like you. We have access to over 100, close to 200 sales thought leaders and sales leaders. So we said, what could we do a little bit different? So we did a search of the 30 most common words on the podcast, right? Not just the and is, of course, but listening, empathy, leadership, clarifying questions, things like that, preparation. And we had two of our researchers actually go through all of the transcripts for those 30 words, seeking the best examples from our thought leaders on evidence of why is empathy so critical to the sales process and preparation. We narrowed it down to 14. Empathy, leadership, listening, things along those lines. And then we found great examples that people have uttered during the podcast. And we put the book together in 14 chapters. And I've read the book, obviously like a dozen times now as we're going through, as the proofing and then editing and all those things. I actually get inspired every time I read it. I'll give you an example, empathy. So again, we're doing today's interview 2 years after this pandemic started, right? And one of the big words over the last 2 years has been, you need to be empathetic. You need to be an empathetic listener. And empathy has come up so many times. There's some words that have come up hundreds of times, like listening and prospecting and leadership. Empathy had come up at least 100 times. And we found some great examples. One of the best little twists on empathy, we were doing a podcast and a lot of the shows we had people watch us. We got a question from someone in the audience. This was about 6 months into the pandemic, spring of 2020. And one of our listeners wrote in and said, can I stop being empathetic? I'm suffering from empathy fatigue. And the guy I had on my podcast, his name is Dan Cole, VP of Sales at Spy Museum and Hanover, Hargrove and other places. He said, if you're a sales professional and you're struggling with empathy, go take a week off, go to the beach, get on a boat. Because if you ain't got no empathy, you're done as a sales professional, because then it's all about you and it has to be about the customer. So that's how we came up with the book and have just great examples throughout. And it inspires me. I'm sure it's going to hopefully inspire a lot of young sales professionals as well.
Well, absolutely. And, I haven't heard all 14, but I'm going to put it out there right now, Fred. And I heard listening, I'm sure asking questions is in there. Trust is probably making the 14. Let's hope. Okay. I am putting it out there right now. You can't beat empathy. Empathy is my number one. And I might come from a slightly different angle because my approach to selling is problem solving. And my approach to problem solving is we have to go deeper into the problem to earn the right to move to a solution or move to at least considering looking at other ideas. That said, if I'm going to ask questions about challenges and concerns somebody's having, then I sure as heck better be empathetic while I'm listening, while I'm asking the questions, while I'm following up on those questions. So empathy, absolutely pivotal. I can't imagine you got one that's bigger than empathy, at least not for me.
Now, empathy is quite large. I mean, the other one that is just as impactful was value. Again, you need to constantly be bringing value to your customer. And here's the thing that I got. And I do an interview almost every day now on the podcast, and we're way over 500 at this point, almost close to 550. And I learn something every single day. I learn an interesting angle or a different approach. And since I've done so many shows, I like to get a little bit deeper. I'll give you an example. When I used to ask, what is your greatest skill as a sales leader? I'm a great listener. Okay, great, good. All right, well, let's talk about your mentor. And then I started saying, okay, everybody is saying listening. I'm a great listener. So I will get deeper. I would say, that's great. Well, give me an example of something you do that makes you a great listener. And there would be things like I prepare, I ask the right questions, I research the customer, I force myself to listen. There's a great expression that we learned recently, we talk about all the time. Wait, why am I talking? Right. So, we talk about that too, that the fact that, the customer wants to come up with solutions and ideas. They want to tell you, they don't want to listen to you keep telling them. So there's so many things, but empathy is definitely number one. Asking the right questions, of course, is number two, or not number two, but it's up there. Value, but value is the other big one too. And not you saying, hey, Rob, here's the value that I'm bringing you, but here's the value that's going to help you help your customer, and even more so help your customer's customer, especially with everything that it's been going on in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I hear you. In terms of asking questions, it's a classic example. I'm still, nothing will beat empathy for me, by the way. But the funny part about asking questions, and 9 years ago, whatever, the first time I ever appeared on your stage, I know I did this exercise. I've never met a group of salespeople. If you say to them, I'm not sure you've heard this, but you need to ask questions. Is that new to anybody? So they've heard it over and over again. It's one of these things where it's logical, but it's not instinctive. And so most people think that they're asking the questions. The way I've always done it as a trainer is I don't ask them if they're asking questions. I mislead them. That's right. I said mislead. I'll mislead them and tell them I want to hear about their style, put them in groups where they can record themselves selling something. And, but I'm obviously not setting it up by telling them I want to hear how many questions you're asking. And, then I double back after we've set the hook nice and deeply, and they've told me what they respect about salespeople and how they're empathetic and honest and wonderful their mentors are. And we pull out, well, how do you think they're doing it? Well, they're asking questions and listening. Yeah, okay, good. I'm so glad. Now let's get back to those sales you made. Just count how many questions you asked and how many statements you made. And it's real eye-opening, Fred. I don't know. Do you remember that exercise when I ran it?
I do. And actually, I want to, again, with your background at Xerox and, the hundreds of thousands of people that you've trained. And that's one reason why we've brought you back so many times is here's the thing. And reading the book, and the reason why we did the book, and the one thing that really came out for me, sales is a profession. And if you're in a profession, you need to be a professional, right? So sales isn't, oh yeah, I got some charisma and, I have energy. To be a professional, to get to the level of the people that you and I love to talk to and love to engage with, as I'm interviewing these people too, I'm thinking to myself, okay, you're a VP of sales at Salesforce, right? You just didn't wake up and say, okay, I'm done flipping burgers today. I'd like to be a VP of sales at Salesforce. And you start, you had a 20, 30-year career of success, of lessons, of things that you did right, things that you did wrong. The market changes. Your company changes, your family situation changes. So how do you continue to be a professional? So that's why, there's people like you who provide so much value to companies, because not everybody is, even if you're 40 years into your career, we just went through we're still going through a pandemic. We now have to communicate through this rectangle, right? Customers don't want to see us anymore. We can't meet people for lunch the way we used to. but you still need to be a professional. So how do you shift? What kind of questions do you ask now, knowing that your customer is going through the same thing we went through over the last 2 years? How do you demonstrate the value? Those aren't things that you just kind of wing. Those are things that you need to work on to truly becoming a professional, like an athlete. Golfers are on the driving range for 3 hours a day.
Right.
Salespeople, a lot of salespeople, they don't understand what it means to prepare. They wing it. They show up and they practice in front of the customer. Well, the great ones, they spend time, they talk to the mirror, they meet with people like you, they bring people like you in, they listen to my podcast. When we did the 500th show, we advertised it on LinkedIn and Facebook and other places. And I had 2 people who reached out to me and said that they listened to all 500 shows.
Wow.
I was like, well, thanks. I appreciate it. And they gave me some insights along the way. And they're both very successful salespeople at well-known companies. So you put that time and energy in, that's what it means to be a professional.
Yeah. And Fred, right before we went on the air, I was talking to a client and we're looking at putting some training on. And the client said, I only have one concern. He said, I have one person who's really good. I mean, really good, by far their number one salesperson. And he said to me, I'm not so sure he's going to be receptive to being trained. And it was all I could do to keep from laughing, because I said, oh, don't worry about him. I said, it's the wannabes, the ones that were almost successful. Those are the ones might be, I've heard enough podcasts. I've been to enough training workshops. But when you work with people who are true stars in their industry, there's one of the common threads, a common theme is they will look at for any idea, anything that would give them just the smallest little assistance. They are on board. Now, can't waste their time. Better show up with the goods. Yeah. But you never have to worry about star salespeople feeling they're so good they don't need to learn anymore. It's the ones right behind them that make me nervous.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, in the very beginning, when I was doing the podcast, I wanted people to study it, listen to it, take notes. And I realized over time that people listen to podcasts, differently. It's not like going to a training class. People, they're mowing their lawn, they're on their bikes, they're walking, they're driving, of course, but people have said to me, I like your show because I can always walk away with something. And we end every show. I'll say, Rob, you've given us 20 great ideas. Give us one specific thing people should do right now to take their sales career to the next level. And we've been doing that since day one. And I use that as the LinkedIn post when I post the show. And, if you could get one idea, and even something that's for you and I might seem simple, someone will say something like, I decided to prepare differently before my call. Good. If that's going to help you, become a better sales professional. And it is those little things, right? It is understanding, that I shouldn't be talking for 90% of the call. I realized that after that call, I spoke for 90%. What was I thinking? So I am aware of that. And next call, I'm going to do my best to speak less or whatever it might be, as you can continually improve. And if you and I can bring those, those ideas, we'll make the world a better place.
Yeah, no, I agree. I actually, even when I give feedback and teach managers how to give feedback, it's all I can do to restrain them and tell them, well, first of all, you're going to give them 2 things that you thought they did well, because not just because you're a nice guy or a woman, but because frequently people don't know, they're unconsciously competent. They don't know they did it well. So we want to build on that. But I always keep it to 2. I don't care if you have 27. If you want to affect no change, give them 27 things to work on. 2. I like 2. And I'll take 1, by the way, but no more than 2, because 2 is a conversation. 2 is a game plan. 2 is something to check back on. Imagine, Fred, if I managed you or you managed me, and every time we got together, we circled the 2 best things we thought you did, make sure you keep doing them, and 2 things that we want you to work on that we can build a game plan on and strategize on and address. That's how we create change, not burying people with just tons of things, pages and pages of notes we took. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work.
No, it does. You can only really deal with 1 or 2 things, like you just said. And once you get past that, you're losing.
All right. So let's put you to the test. Share one that you'd recommend for our listeners.
Yeah, one of the most impactful statements, and I've repeated, there's so many things that I've heard that I've repeated on the show. I'll tell you the one most impactful thing. The guy's name is Gary Millwit. He's a sales, I think right now he's leading training for JG Wentworth, which is the settlement company. You get a medical settlement or a lottery, and he's a tremendous sales professional. And I've had him on the show a couple of times. He's a sales leader as compared to someone like you, who's a thought leader and author. And his bit of advice, which has stuck with me, not just in sales, but in life as well. He said, make whoever you're talking to feel important. Make whoever you're talking to feel important, be it a customer, be it, I've told people who ask me for career advice, I say, when you're on the interview, make the person who's interviewing you feel important. Look at them and make them feel important. And I think about that every time I get on a call. Because people want to feel that way. They don't want to be told what to do. They want to feel that they're coming up with the new, fresh ideas. So that is my advice. As a matter of fact, my daughter actually was applying for jobs and she asked for advice. And I said, when you do the interview, make that person do the research ahead of time on who you're talking to, ask them questions, right? Ask them for their advice on things. Don't just think that you're saying the right thing, make them feel important.
Yeah. Yeah. And then once again, that empathy will probably come in nicely too, just as a nice spice on the top of that. Okay. I know that, that May is Lyme Disease Awareness Month. And I know that one of the two books that you have coming out deals with Lyme disease. I'm going to give you a minute on this one. Okay. Talk to us. This obviously is very important to you. We don't write books because we're casual on a subject. And at first, when I was putting together my questions for you, I thought I'm going to just stay on the sales side. But listen, you wrote a book on it. It's very important to you. So, and May is a big month for Lyme disease. So talk to me about why, what's your why on this one?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I appreciate it. May is Lyme Disease Awareness Month. It's also Mental Health Awareness Month, for that matter. Someone in my life has what's known as Lyme disease. It's a tick-borne illness. About a year ago, they had let's just say a physical reaction. So I decided to become an expert on Lyme disease to understand what was happening to this person. Along the way, I learned things that I had no idea about. Close to 500,000 people a year are inflicted with Lyme disease. It's a horrible disease. It's at epidemic levels. Basically, it's caused when a tick comes off of an animal, a deer or a mouse or something like that. It then transfers bacteria from that animal into the human. It's a disease that people don't really know about. The symptoms are many. It inflicts anybody, it could be. And I just decided to become an expert. I realized that there's a bunch of books on the medical side of Lyme, how to treat it, my journey with Lyme disease, and they're all like dark books, into the woods, those kinds of things. So I realized that when I got really deep into studying this, that family members, spouses, friends, they don't understand what the person with Lyme disease is going through. So I decided to write a book. It's called Love, Hope, Lyme, what family members, partners, and friends who love a chronic Lyme survivor must know. And I sent it to a whole bunch of people in the Lyme world, and the response has been tremendous. So I never thought that one of the first two books, Rob Giles, that I'd be writing would be on Lyme disease.
Right.
But it is. And I'm very excited for the interest that I think this book will have, and how it will impact families and hopefully save relationships.
Well, congratulations. And a Rob Jollis motto has always been, because I mentor a lot of authors, and a very common question is, why that book, Rob? And one of my mottos has always been, at the end of the day, for most authors, we don't find a book, it finds us. And your story here, and someone that's close to you, and tells me all I need to hear, which is, I think this book found you more than you found it. And I congratulate you.
Thanks, Robin. It's been an honor knowing you, and thanks for having me on your show.
Oh, been an absolute pleasure. Listen, folks, we'll do it again the best we can next time. Until then, stay safe.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please rate and recommend it on iTunes, Outcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information on this show and Rob at jollis.com.